Michael, hold up by the aircraft for a minute.
Sure, we're just refueling before we head east.
This operation had been in the works for hours across 3 states. Michael Galanter flew right into it. By the time agents unzip those bags, his story about a stranger at a coffee shop won't matter anymore.
We need to ask about the bags loaded in the cabin.
They're not mine, I'm just flying them to Atlanta.
He would repeat that line for the next 3 hours. The bags were not his. He did not know what was inside. A man at a coffee shop in California had asked him to fly them to Atlanta. By the time agents finished cataloging the contents of that rented Piper PA-28, the story had already collapsed. 6 military-style duffel bags, 4 smaller carry-ons, 150 pounds of marijuana, 9 pounds of hashish, 3 pounds of psilocin mushrooms, 1 rented single-engine aircraft that had crossed nearly 2,000 miles of American airspace before a drug detector dog at a refueling stop in Lubbock, Texas, brought all of it to a stop. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. How many small planes do you think cross this country every single day without a single bag being inspected? Drop your guess in the comments. And if you want to see how the system actually catches the ones who try to slip through, hit subscribe. We cover cases the mainstream news will not touch every single week. Michael David Galanter was born in 1976 in Walnut Creek, California, the only child of an aerospace machinist and a high school librarian. His father worked the swing shift at a precision parts shop in Hayward that machined components for civilian aircraft. His mother stocked shelves at Las Lomas High School and ran the summer reading program. They lived in a 2-bedroom ranch house on a cul-de-sac off Ignacio Valley Road, and from the front yard, you could see the contrails of small planes departing Buchanan Field across the freeway. His obsession with airplanes started before he could read. By 8, he could identify every airliner in the SFO arrival pattern by silhouette. By 12, he was building Revell models so detailed he weathered the engine cowlings with gray pastels. His father drove him out to Buchanan Field on weekends, and they would lean against the chain-link fence near the run-up area and watch the Cessnas and Pipers cycle through their checks. The smell of 100 low-lead avgas became, for him, the smell of a future he believed was guaranteed. He graduated from Las Lomas High School in 1994. His yearbook entry listed aviation as the only thing under future plans. He enrolled at Diablo Valley College that fall and worked nights at a Round Table Pizza in Pleasant Hill to start paying for flight lessons at Sterling Aviation, the flight school on the Buchanan Field ramp. Lessons ran $98 an hour for a Cessna 152 with instructor. He soloed in October of 1995 at age 19 after 18 hours of dual instruction, 2 below the national average. His instructor wrote in his logbook that he was, quote, a natural stick with above-average situational awareness for his hours. He earned his private pilot certificate at 20, instrument rating at 22, commercial certificate at 23. He picked up his certified flight instructor rating the year after, and by 25 he was teaching primary students at the same school where he had been a student. The pay was bad, $20 an hour, only billable when you were actually in the airplane. No benefits, no sick days. But it was time in his logbook, and time in a logbook is what builds a career in aviation. He moved across the bay to San Francisco in 2003, renting a converted in-law unit in the Outer Sunset for $900 a month. He commuted back to Buchanan Field most days, driving an aging Toyota pickup across the Bay Bridge before the morning traffic locked up. On weekends, he flew charter, mostly weekend warriors who wanted to take their families up to Lake Tahoe or down to Monterey. By 2008, he had logged 2,800 hours and was on the short list for a regional airline interview with Mesa, with Horizon, with SkyWest. The interview kept getting pushed back by a month, then by a quarter, then indefinitely. Then the recession hit. Regional airline hiring froze entirely. The charter clients stopped flying. The flight school cut his hours from 40 a week to 15. He took a side job delivering for a Mission District pizza chain to cover the rent. He kept flying when he could, picking up an occasional pipeline patrol contract out of Concord and the occasional aerial photography gig over the wine country, but the airline interview never materialized. By his mid-30s, he was still adjuncting at Sterling Aviation, still in the same $900 apartment that had crept up to $2,400 a month, and still about 50 hours short of the minimum experience the regionals had quietly raised after the Colgan Air Flight 3407 accident. He never quite gave up on the airlines. He just stopped making forward progress toward them. His friends from flight school had moved on, to SkyWest and Horizon, and one to Delta. He was still on the ramp at Buchanan Field, teaching pre-solo students how to taxi without locking up the brakes. To understand what Michael Galanter did, you have to understand how general aviation actually works in the United States, because almost nothing about it resembles what travelers experience at a commercial airport. There are roughly 5,000 public-use general aviation airports in this country. Most of them have no control tower, no TSA checkpoint, no magnetometer, no baggage X-ray, no manifest. A pilot with a current medical certificate and a current biennial flight review can walk onto a ramp, untie an airplane, fuel it from a self-serve pump with a credit card, and depart for anywhere in the lower 48 without speaking to a single federal employee. He will file a flight plan if he chooses to, and he will talk to air traffic control if he requests flight following, but neither one is mandatory for a visual flight rules cross-country. The system is built on trust. A pilot with a license is presumed to be a law-abiding citizen using the aircraft for a lawful purpose. Customs and Border Protection has an Air and Marine Operations Division that monitors low-altitude flights along the southern border and along certain coastal corridors, and the Drug Enforcement Administration tracks tail numbers known to be associated with trafficking. But on a routine cross-country flight by a fully licensed pilot in a properly registered aircraft, the level of federal scrutiny is essentially zero. That gap is the entire reason general aviation has become an attractive vector for moving cargo that cannot be moved any other way. A truck on Interstate 40 will pass through fixed way stations and the occasional state police interdiction team. A commercial flight will require every bag to go through an X-ray and every passenger through a body scanner. A FedEx package will be sniffed by a dog at multiple sortation centers. A bus passenger will encounter random checkpoints in certain corridors. But a single-engine Piper at 5,000 feet, on a VFR cross-country, talking to nobody but flight following on a discrete frequency, is largely invisible. This is what Customs and Border Protection's Air Interdiction Unit was created to fight. The unit operates a fleet of King Airs and Black Hawks and ground surveillance aircraft from operating bases in Riverside, Tucson, Corpus Christi, and beyond. Their job is to spot the anomalies. The flights that do not behave like normal flights, the pilots who do not behave like normal pilots. They cannot inspect every general aviation flight because there are roughly 50 million of them every year in the United States. So they work from tips and patterns and the relationships they have built with FBO employees and ramp workers across the country. And the way they spot the ones worth looking at is by reading the tells. The plan, as best as agents would later reconstruct it, came together over a period of weeks in early 2024. Michael Galanter was 48 years old, still teaching primary students at Buchanan Field, still in the same Outer Sunset apartment, now 4 months behind on rent. His co-defendant, a 31-year-old named Ethan Oliver Wynn Wade, was a Bay Area acquaintance with connections in the Northern California cannabis trade and contacts on the receiving end in Georgia. The Bay Area produces some of the most expensive cannabis in the country. Atlanta retails for 2 to 3 times what the same product wholesales for in Humboldt County. The math on paper is simple. Move the product east, and every pound nearly triples in value. The hard part has never been the math. The hard part has always been the transport. Highway interdiction teams on Interstate 40 and Interstate 10 have been intercepting cannabis loads out of California for 40 years. UPS and FedEx run dogs through their parcel hubs. The Postal Inspection Service runs dogs through their bulk mail centers. A vehicle full of duffel bags driving from California to Georgia is a stop waiting to happen. A small plane, in theory, solves the entire problem. No weigh stations, no checkpoints, no X-rays. Just a pilot with 3,000 hours and a rented airplane. Gallanter selected a Piper PA 28-181, the Archer variant, a 4-seat single-engine low-wing aircraft from a rental fleet at a Northern California airport. The Archer cruises at around 120 knots, carries roughly enough fuel for 4 hours of flight, and has a useful load that allows for 2 adults and a moderate amount of baggage. 6 large military-style duffel bags, 4 smaller bags, 2 adults, and a full fuel tank would push the airplane very close to its maximum gross weight. But a pilot of his experience knew how to calculate weight and balance to keep the aircraft within its legal envelope on paper. The route was planned in 3 legs. A first leg out of Northern California to Page, Arizona, a small airport on the Utah border near Lake Powell. A second leg from Page to Lubbock, Texas. A third and final leg from Lubbock to the Atlanta area, where Wade's contacts would offload the cargo. Total flight time, about 13 hours of actual airtime. Total elapsed time, 2 days. Total expected return, after fuel and rental and Wade's cut, somewhere in the high 5 figures for Gallanter alone. Enough to clear his back rent, his credit card debt, and the tax bill from his last quarter as an independent contractor, with enough left over to buy himself a year of breathing room. On the morning of the departure, the weather in Northern California was poor. Low ceilings, scattered showers, marginal visual flight rules conditions. A prudent pilot would have waited a day. A pilot on a tight schedule with a particular kind of cargo could not afford to wait. Gallanter filed his flight plan, paid for his fuel in cash at the FBO counter, and signed for the rental. He fueled the aircraft himself at the self-serve pump, rather than letting the FBO line crew do it. He loaded the 6 military-style duffel bags and the 4 smaller bags into the cabin himself. Wade arrived separately, carrying nothing of his own. They departed under a low overcast, climbed through the marine layer to 4,500 feet, leveled off in clear air above the Central Valley haze, and pointed the airplane east. Roughly 30 minutes after wheels up, the first phone call came into the Customs and Border Protection Air and Marine Operations Center. The tip was specific and detailed. A small white and blue Piper Archer had just departed a Northern California airport under suspicious circumstances. The occupants had paid for fuel in cash. The pilot had fueled the aircraft himself rather than going through the line crew. The cabin had been visibly stuffed with duffel bags and luggage. They had departed in marginal weather that any sensible pilot would have waited out. The caller, an employee at the FBO, had been working general aviation ramps for 19 years and knew what a normal departure looked like. This was not one. That single tip set the rest of the chain in motion. Air interdiction agents pulled the flight plan. They pulled the rental records on the aircraft. They cross-referenced the pilot's name against DEA and ICE Homeland Security Investigations databases. Nothing came back. No prior arrests, no prior contacts. A clean ATP-eligible commercial pilot with a clean medical and a current biennial flight review. But everything else about the flight was wrong. A normal cross-country general aviation flight pays for fuel with a corporate or personal credit card. It does not pay in cash. Cash leaves no fueling receipt with a name on it. A normal pilot lets the FBO line crew fuel the aircraft because that is what line crews are for, and because letting them do it allows the pilot to file the flight plan and complete the run-up checks without rushing. A pilot who fuels the aircraft himself is usually a pilot who does not want a fueling receipt with his name on it, or a pilot who does not want the line crew looking too closely at what is in the cabin. A normal weekend cross-country has a backpack and maybe a small overnight bag per occupant. It does not have 6 military-style duffel bags filling every available seat and the cargo area. And a normal pilot does not depart in marginal weather to make a destination on a schedule. Weather waits in aviation. Schedules do not. Each of these tells, taken on its own, is not actionable. There is no federal offense in paying cash for fuel. There is no federal offense in self-fueling. There is no federal offense in carrying luggage. There is no federal offense in launching in marginal weather, as long as the pilot is appropriately rated and the conditions are above legal minimums. But 4 of them, stacked on top of each other, on the same flight, by the same pilot, light up the kind of pattern that interdiction agents are trained to recognize. The air interdiction watch officer pulled the flight up on radar. The Piper was already over Nevada, climbing through 6,000 feet on a course that would put it into Page, Arizona for fuel within the next hour. Agents made calls. Federal agencies talked to each other. The DEA was notified. ICE Homeland Security Investigations was notified. The local CBP office in West Texas was notified. By the time the Piper touched down at Page Municipal Airport for its first refueling stop, the flight was being watched. The plane refueled. The 2 occupants did not leave the airport. They did not stay overnight. They topped off the tanks, used the FBO restroom, and departed again within the hour, this time heading southeast toward Texas. The watch officer flagged the next likely fuel stop. Lubbock Preston Smith International, a small commercial airport in the Texas Panhandle with a general aviation FBO on the east side of the field. The decision was made before the aircraft was even airborne again. A ramp check would be conducted at Lubbock. The Piper landed at Lubbock just after 1 in the afternoon, local time. Galanter taxied to the general aviation ramp on the east side of the field and shut down at a self-serve fuel island. He climbed out, stretched his back, walked a slow circle around the aircraft to check the cowling and the tires, and began to fuel the airplane for the 3rd time that day. He did not notice the 2 unmarked vehicles parked at the edge of the ramp. He did not notice the Lubbock Police K-9 unit waiting in a hangar across the taxiway. He did not notice the Homeland Security Investigations agents in plain clothes standing near the FBO door. The agents waited until he had hung up the fuel hose and signed the receipt. Then they approached. They identified themselves. They asked if he was the pilot in command. He said he was. They asked if he would consent to a ramp check, which is a brief regulatory inspection allowed under federal aviation regulations and conducted routinely by FAA inspectors and, in interdiction cases, by federal law enforcement. He consented. He did not have a meaningful choice. A refusal would have triggered a hold on the aircraft while a warrant was sought, and the result would have been the same. The ramp check began with a request to see his pilot certificate, his medical certificate, the aircraft's airworthiness documents, the registration, and the most recent annual inspection logbook entry. He produced all of them. Everything was in order. While one agent reviewed the paperwork on the wing of the Piper, the other walked slowly around the airplane and looked through the side windows of the cabin. The cabin was packed wall to wall with bags, 6 large military-style duffels, 4 smaller carry-ons, stuffed into every seat, against every window, filling the entire interior of an aircraft that was supposed to be flown by 2 people on a routine cross-country. The agent stepped back from the window. He asked Galanter what was in the bags. Galanter said he did not know. The agent asked again. Galanter said the bags belonged to a friend, and he had been asked to deliver them to Atlanta. The K-9 unit was called over. The handler walked the dog around the perimeter of the aircraft on a long lead. The dog worked the seams of the fuselage methodically, nose moving in tight arcs along the baggage door and the rear cabin window. On the second pass, it alerted strongly at the rear of the fuselage, behind the wing, the area of the aircraft where the largest of the duffel bags was visible through the back window. The alert was the legal trigger for a probable cause search. Agents opened the aircraft. They removed the bags one at a time and laid them out on the ramp. They photographed each one. They unzipped the first duffel. Inside were dozens of vacuum-sealed bricks of marijuana, each labeled with a strain name in marker on masking tape. They unzipped the second, the same, the third, the same. By the time they had finished inventorying the cabin, the count stood at 98 bags of marijuana, totaling roughly 150 pounds. 4 bags of pressed hashish, roughly 9 pounds. 2 bags of dried psilocin mushrooms, roughly 3 pounds. All vacuum sealed. All commercially packaged. all consistent with retail distribution rather than personal use. The street value, depending on the market it was destined for, was somewhere in the high six figures, possibly 7. We are about to get into how the federal system handles a case like this. Before we do, I want you to think about something. This pilot had been flying since he was 19 years old, 3,000 hours in his logbook, a clean record, a real career, even if it had stalled out, and he threw all of it away for a single flight east. If you have ever wondered how someone with that much to lose makes that decision, drop a comment with what you think pushed him over the edge. And subscribe if you have not. We do not let stories like this disappear. Gallanter was placed in handcuffs on the ramp at Lubbock Preston Smith International at approximately 1:45 in the afternoon. Wynne Wade was already in custody, having been pulled aside by a second team of agents while Gallanter was being walked around to the back of the aircraft. The interview, conducted in a small office inside the FBO building, was recorded. Agent: Mr. Gallanter, do you understand what was in the bags we just removed from your aircraft? Gallanter: I do now. I did not before. Agent: You did not know your airplane was loaded with 150 pounds of marijuana? Gallanter: No, sir. I was asked to fly the bags to Atlanta as a favor. I did not look inside them. Agent: Who asked you to fly them? Gallanter: A guy I met at a coffee shop in San Francisco. Agent: A guy you met at a coffee shop. Gallanter: Yes, sir. Agent: What is his name? Gallanter: I do not know his last name. Agent: What is his first name? Gallanter: He said his name was Mike, I think. The agents pressed him. Where did the coffee shop meeting take place? He could not say specifically, only that it was somewhere in the Mission District. What did Mike look like? He could not describe him in any usable detail, only that he was, quote, normal looking. How did Mike know he was a pilot? He could not explain. How did Mike pay him for the flight? Cash, up front, in an envelope. How much? He did not want to answer. The agents kept pressing. He eventually said the agreed-upon payment was $35,000 for the round trip. For a man with 3,000 hours and a clean commercial certificate, $35,000 was what a regional airline first officer would have been paid for about 4 months of work. To fly a load of cargo from California to Atlanta and back, it was a single weekend. The agents asked him whether he had ever done a flight like this before. He said he had not. They asked him how he had connected with Wynne Wade. He said Wynne Wade was a friend of a friend. They asked him whether he had ever flown Wynne Wade anywhere before. He hesitated for several seconds. Then he said he would like to speak with an attorney. The interview ended. Gallanter was transported to the Lubbock County Detention Center to be booked on federal charges. The Piper was towed off the ramp and impounded by Air and Marine Operations pending forfeiture proceedings. The duffel bags were sealed into evidence and transported to the DEA office in Lubbock. The case was assigned to the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Texas, Lubbock Division. The investigation was a joint effort between Immigration and Customs Enforcement Homeland Security Investigations, Customs and Border Protection Air and Marine Operations, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Lubbock Police Department K-9 unit that had performed the original alert on the ramp. A federal grand jury returned an indictment charging Michael David Gallanter and Ethan Oliver Wynne Wade with 1 count of possession with intent to distribute marijuana in violation of Title 21 of the United States Code, Section 841. Given the quantity, well in excess of 100 kilograms, the statutory range exposed both defendants to a potential sentence of 5 to 40 years in federal prison. Gallanter's defense attorney, a federal public defender out of the Lubbock office, filed several motions in the months that followed. A motion to suppress the search, arguing that the ramp check and subsequent K-9 deployment had been pretextual. The judge denied it, finding that the consent to the ramp check had been freely given and that the K-9 alert had provided independent probable cause for the search of the aircraft. A motion to exclude statements made before the formal Miranda warning. The judge granted that one in part, suppressing certain post-arrest statements while admitting the pre-arrest exchange on the ramp. The coffee shop stranger defense was not pursued at trial because there was no trial. Faced with the surviving evidence, with the unsuppressed statements, and with the prospect of testimony from his co-defendant, who was preparing to cooperate, Galanter entered a plea of guilty to the single count of possession with intent to distribute marijuana. The plea was entered approximately 7 months after his arrest. At sentencing, the judge addressed Galanter directly. The judge noted that he had been entrusted with a federal pilot certificate, a credential that the United States government issues only to individuals it has determined to be of good moral character and competent in the operation of an aircraft. He had taken that credential and used it to move 150 pounds of controlled substances across the country, exploiting a system of trust built on the assumption that licensed pilots would act in good faith. The judge said that pilots who choose to use their certificates this way undermine the entire general aviation system and force federal agencies to expend enormous resources to detect the small number of bad actors hiding in an enormous volume of legitimate traffic. The sentencing guidelines, calculated on the basis of the drug quantity and the defendant's criminal history category of 1, produced an advisory range of 46 to 57 months. The federal public defender argued for a downward variance based on Galanter's lack of any prior record, his cooperation in the post-plea phase, and the relatively limited role he played in the larger distribution network. The judge granted a partial variance. The final sentence was 37 months in federal prison, 3 years and 1 month, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Restitution was assessed against him for the cost of impounding and inspecting the aircraft and for the destruction of the seized narcotics. The pilot certificate was administratively revoked by the Federal Aviation Administration in a separate emergency order issued within days of the conviction. The commercial certificate, the instrument rating, the certified flight instructor rating, the medical certificate, all revoked together. Michael Galanter would never legally pilot an aircraft again. Ethan Oliver Wynne Wade was sentenced separately on the same charge. He received a similar term. Galanter began his sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution at Lompoc, California, a low-security facility on the Central Coast, roughly 250 miles south of the airport, where he had earned his private pilot certificate 28 years earlier. He will be eligible for release in late 2027. He will be 51 years old when he comes out. The career that began at age 19 with a Cessna 152 over the East Bay Hills will not resume in any form that the FAA recognizes. The man at the coffee shop, if he ever existed, was never identified. This case was layered, but the case on the right-hand side will leave you wondering how anyone could think they would get away with it.